The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when he laughed in her face. Grant Highmore didn't just leave his wife. He destroyed her. Standing in that cold Manhattan office, he stripped Madeline of her home, her dignity, and her name, sneering that she was a nobody who would starve without his credit card. He thought he had buried her. He thought she was gone forever. But 2 years later, at the most exclusive gala in New York City, Grant is about to learn a terrifying lesson. Be careful who you step on during your ascent. Because when a billionaire titan like Sebastian Cross walks right past you to kiss the hand of the nobody you discarded, you realize too late, she was never the one who needed you. The sound of the pen scratching against the parchment felt less like a signature and more like the severing of a limb. Inside the sterile, glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor of the Arrington and Finch law firm, the air conditioning was set to a bone-chilling 65 degrees. It was a power move. Everything Grant did was a power move. Madeline Sterling sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded in her lap to hide the tremors. She wore a simple gray cardigan that had seen better days, her brown hair pulled back in a messy bun. Across from her sat Grant Highmore. He looked impeccable. He always did. His navy bespoke suit from Savile Row cost more than Madeline's father had made in a decade. His hair was slicked back, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and his blue eyes, once the source of so much warmth, were now frozen over with contempt. "Is it done?" Grant asked, not looking at Madeline, but at his pitbull of a lawyer, Mr. Finch. "It is, Mr. Highmore," Finch said, snapping the folder shut. "The assets have been divided according to the prenuptial agreement. The townhouse in the West Village, the Hamptons estate, and the portfolio remain yours. Miss Sterling receives the agreed-upon lump sum of $25,000 and retains her personal effects. $25,000. For 7 years of marriage. For 7 years of hosting his dinners, managing his social calendar, nursing him through his bouts of stress-induced gastritis, and editing his speeches until late into the night." Grant finally looked at her. He checked his Rolex, a Daytona he'd bought to celebrate his first million. "Well," he said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "that was easier than I expected." Madeline stood up slowly. Her legs felt heavy. "Grant," she said softly, I wanted to ask about the dog, Barnaby. You're never home, and Barnaby is a purebred French bulldog, Madeline." Grant cut her off, his voice dripping with boredom. "He's an asset. He stays with the apartment. Besides, Tiffany loves him." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Tiffany, the 22-year-old Instagram model Grant had been mentoring for the last 6 months. "You don't even walk him," Madeline whispered, a tear finally escaping. "He has a sensitive stomach. He needs." "Stop," Grant snapped. He walked around the table and stood inches from her face. He smelled of Santal 33 and arrogance. "Stop pretending you have any leverage here, Maddie. You don't get the dog. You don't get the house. You don't get the friends." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Let's be honest, for the first time in 7 years, you were a bad investment. I picked you up from that diner in Queens because I thought you were quaint, humble. But you never grew, did you? You're still just a waitress playing dress-up. You're a nobody, Maddie. Without me, without the name Highmore attached to you, you don't exist in this city." He pulled back and turned to the door. "Security will escort you out. Don't go back to the townhouse. Your things have already been boxed and sent to your mother's address." "My mother lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Jersey," Madeline said, her voice shaking. "Then I guess it'll be cozy," Grant smirked. He didn't look back. He walked out the door, Mr. Finch trailing behind him like a loyal lapdog. Madeline stood alone in the cold conference room. She looked down at her hand, looking for the phantom weight of the wedding ring she had just surrendered. He called her a nobody. She walked to the window and looked out at the sprawling, gray skyline of New York City. The rain was starting to fall, blurring the lights of the empire that men like Grant Highmore thought they owned. "A nobody," she whispered to the glass. She reached into her battered purse and pulled out a phone, not the sleek iPhone Grant insisted she use, but an old, cracked Android she kept for emergencies. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. It rang once. Twice. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Uncle Leo?" Madeline said, her voice changing. The tremble vanished. The meekness evaporated. "It's Madeline. I'm done. The non-compete clause in the marriage contract. I checked it. It only applies to Madeline Highmore. That person doesn't exist anymore." "Maddie?" The voice on the other end sounded shocked. "My God, kid. We thought you were gone for good. What do you need?" Madeline watched Grant's black SUV pull out of the garage 40 floors below. "I need a workspace," she said, her eyes narrowing. "And I need you to dust off the blueprints for the Ether engine. Grant is trying to build a logistics empire on outdated tech. I think it's time we showed him what real innovation looks like." "You sure about this, Maddie? The sharks will come for you." "Let them come," Madeline said, turning away from the window. "I'm not a wife anymore. I'm a nobody. And nobodies have nothing to lose." 2 years later, Grant Highmore stood on the balcony of his new penthouse at 432 Park Avenue, swirling a glass of Chateau Margaux. The world lay at his feet. In the 2 years since he'd shed the dead weight of his marriage, Highmore Dynamics had tripled in value. His shipping drones were revolutionizing the logistics industry. He was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and GQ. He was the golden boy of Wall Street. "Babe, look at this." Tiffany came bounding out onto the balcony. She was wearing a sheer silk robe, holding her phone up. "We're trending again. Number power couple." Grant smiled tightly. Tiffany was beautiful, undeniably. But her conversation depth ended at the comments section of TikTok. "That's great, Tiff," he said, turning back to the city. "Are you excited for tonight?" she asked, draping her arms around his neck. "The Obsidian Gala. Everyone is going to be there. I heard the mayor is coming, and, oh my God, Sebastian Cross." Grant's grip on his wine glass tightened. Sebastian Cross. The name alone commanded silence in boardrooms. He was the elusive billionaire behind Cross Industries, a conglomerate that owned everything from aerospace engineering to pharmaceutical patents. He was worth 10 times what Grant was. He was the apex predator. Rumor had it, Cross was looking for a new partner for his global distribution network, a contract worth $4 billion. "Cross will be there," Grant said, his eyes gleaming. "And I'm going to make sure he knows who I am. Highmore Dynamics is the only logical choice for his network. I've been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months. "You'll get him, babe," Tiffany giggled, pecking him on the cheek. "You're Grant Highmore. You get everything you want." Grant took a sip of wine. She was right. He did. His phone buzzed. It was his CFO, Marcus. "Grant, we have a problem." The stock just took a dip. Another rumor about Project Aeon. Grant scowled. For the last year, a shadow had been creeping up on his market share. A mysterious shell company called Aeon had been filing patents that were remarkably similar to his own, only better, faster, cheaper. No one knew who ran Aeon. No one knew where they were based. They were ghosts. "Ignore it," Grant muttered to himself. "Vaporware. It doesn't exist." He checked the time. 6 p.m. "Go get ready, Tiff," Grant commanded. "Wear the red dress. The one with the slit. We need eyes on us tonight." "Yes, sir," she chirped, and ran back inside. Grant finished his wine. Tonight was the night. He would secure the Cross contract, bury this Aeon annoyance, and cement his legacy. He thought about Madeline for a split second, a fleeting image of her brown hair and sad eyes. "I hope she's enjoying her life in Jersey," he thought with a sneer. "Probably waiting tables at a diner. A nobody." He walked inside to put on his tuxedo. He had no idea that the nobody was already at the venue, and she wasn't wearing a waitress uniform. The Obsidian Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Temple of Dendur was bathed in violet and gold light. A string quartet played contemporary pop hits, filling the vast stone chamber with haunting melodies. The guest list was a who's who of the Western world. Tech moguls, Hollywood royalty, European aristocrats. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. Grant Highmore swept in with Tiffany on his arm. She was stunning in scarlet, though her laugh was a little too loud for the acoustics of the room. Grant worked the room like a politician. A handshake here, a charming nod there. He felt electric. "Grant, good to see you," called out David Sterling, no relation to Madeline, a hedge fund manager. "Stock is looking strong." "Always, David, always," Grant beamed. "Have you heard?" David lowered his voice. "Sebastian Cross is actually here. He's in the VIP mezzanine, Rumor is he's announcing the partner for the Global Link project tonight. Is he? Grant adjusted his cufflinks. Then I better go pay my respects. Grant began to steer Tiffany toward the velvet rope guarding the VIP stairs, but the crowd was dense. He paused near the bar to grab a champagne flute. That was when the room shifted. It wasn't a sound, it was a silence. A ripple of quiet started at the massive entrance doors and spread inward like a wave. People stopped talking, heads turned. Even the string quartet seemed to falter for a beat. "Who is that?" Tiffany whispered, sounding genuinely intimidated. Grant turned around. Standing at the top of the entrance stairs was a woman. She was wearing a gown that looked like it was woven from midnight itself, deep, shimmering black velvet that hugged her figure before cascading into a train of silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. It was daring, sophisticated, and regal. She wore no jewelry except for a pair of teardrop diamond earrings that looked heavy enough to sink a boat. Her hair, a rich, glossy chestnut, was styled in old Hollywood waves. Her lips were painted a deep crimson. She began to descend the stairs. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. She moved with a grace that made the models in the room look clumsy. Grant squinted. There was something familiar about the walk. The tilt of the head. The woman reached the bottom of the stairs. A waiter immediately appeared with a tray. She took a glass of water without looking at him, her gaze sweeping the room with an air of bored detachment. She turned slightly, and the light hit her face. Grant dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Champagne splashed onto Tiffany's red dress, and she shrieked. "Grant! What the hell?" Grant didn't hear her. He couldn't breathe. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. It was Maddie, but it wasn't the Maddie he knew. The Maddie he knew wore oversized sweaters and apologized for taking up space. The Maddie he knew had dull hair and bitten fingernails. This woman was a queen. "No," Grant whispered, his voice trembling. "That's impossible." "Who is she?" Tiffany demanded, dabbing at her dress with a napkin. "Do you know her?" The woman, Maddie, locked eyes with Grant from across the room. For a second, Grant expected her to look away, to look scared, to look ashamed. Instead, Maddie smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile that promised violence. She raised her water glass in a mock toast, then turned her back on him and walked straight toward the VIP section. "Grant?" Tiffany whined. "Shut up," Grant hissed, shaking off his shock. Anger replaced the confusion. How dare she? How dare she crash this event? She must have seduced someone to get in. A gatecrasher. A fraud. She was going to embarrass him. If people found out his ex-wife was here, looking like a high-priced escort, it would ruin his night. "Stay here," Grant ordered Tiffany. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to take out the trash," Grant growled, buttoning his jacket. He began to march across the room, shoving people aside. He was going to confront her. He was going to have security throw her out into the street where she belonged. He intercepted her, just as she was about to step past the velvet rope to the VIP area. The security guard, a massive man named Tiny, had stepped aside to let her pass, but Grant lunged forward and grabbed her arm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Grant hissed, spinning her around. The music seemed to stop. A circle of silence formed around them. Maddie looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. Her expression was one of mild distaste, as if she had stepped in something unpleasant. "Hello, Grant," she said. Her voice was different too, lower, smoother, careful with the fabric. "It's custom." "Custom?" Grant laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Who did you sleep with to get that dress, Maddie? Or did you steal it? You need to leave." "Now." "I don't think I will," she said calmly. "You don't belong here," Grant spat, his face inches from hers. "Look around you. These are titans of industry. Inventors. Billionaires. You are a housewife I fired. You are a nobody." He squeezed her arm harder. "Security is going to drag you out, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows you're just my desperate ex-wife trying to beg for alimony." Maddie didn't flinch. She leaned in, her eyes cold as ice. "Let go of my arm, Grant," she said softly, "or you will lose the hand." "Is there a problem here?" The voice was deep, resonant, and carried an authority that made Grant freeze instantly. Grant looked up. Standing on the steps of the VIP mezzanine looking down at them like a god from Olympus, was Sebastian Cross. The billionaire was tall, with silver fox hair and a tuxedo that made Grant's look like a rental. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards, but he didn't need them. His presence was enough. Grant immediately let go of Maddie and straightened his tie, a sycophantic smile plastering itself onto his face. "Mr. Cross," Grant exclaimed, stepping over the shattered remains of his dignity. "So, an honor to meet you. I'm Grant Highmore, CEO of Highmore Dynamics. I was just handling a situation with an uninvited guest. A stalker, actually. I was just about to have security remove her so she doesn't bother you." Grant gestured dismissively at Maddie. "She's a nobody. I apologize for the disturbance." The entire room held its breath. Sebastian Cross descended the stairs slowly. He didn't look at Grant. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Madeline. Grant felt a surge of triumph. "Here it comes," he thought. "Cross is going to have her thrown out. He hates disorder." Sebastian stopped in front of them. He towered over Grant. Then, the unthinkable happened. Sebastian Cross ignored Grant entirely. He turned his body away from the tech CEO and faced Madeline. His cold, hard expression melted into a look of genuine warmth and profound respect. He extended a hand. "Madeline," Sebastian said, his voice dropping an octave to a tone of reverence. "I was worried you wouldn't come." Madeline smiled, a real smile this time. She placed her hand in his. "Hello, Sebastian," she said. Traffic was murder. Sebastian Cross, the man who made prime ministers wait in the rain, bowed his head and kissed Madeline's knuckles. "The gala hasn't started until you arrived," Sebastian said. He straightened up and tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. Then, he finally looked at Grant. The warmth vanished. Sebastian looked at Grant with the same expression one would look at a cockroach on a wedding cake. "And who," Sebastian asked Madeline, "is this noisy little man?" Grant's mouth fell open. He turned pale, the color draining from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. Madeline looked at Grant. She paused, savoring the moment. "Oh, him?" she said lightly. "He's nobody." Grant Highmore felt like the marble floor had turned into quicksand. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, watching the man he idolized escort his ex-wife up the stairs. Did Sebastian Cross just kiss her hand?" Tiffany asked, her voice shrill. She looked at the stain on her red dress, then at the retreating back of Madeline, and for the first time, she looked worried. "Grant, you said she was a nobody. You said she was broke." "She is," Grant snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. His mind was racing. How? Had she tricked Cross? Was she a high-end escort now? That had to be it. Men like Sebastian Cross didn't date divorcees from Queens. He was just being polite. "Yes, that was it. Come on," Grant said, gripping Tiffany's elbow a little too hard. "We're going up there." "But the guard—" "I am Grant Highmore," he hissed. "I don't wait in line." Grant marched to the velvet rope. Tiny, the security guard, crossed his massive arms. "Mr. Cross is expecting me," Grant lied smoothly. "We have business to discuss regarding the Global Link partnership." Tiny looked at Grant, then up at the mezzanine where Sebastian was pulling out a chair for Madeline. He tapped his earpiece. After a moment of static, he grunted and unhooked the rope. He says, "Let the entertainment in." Grant ignored the slight. He pulled Tiffany up the stairs, composing his face into a mask of confident affability. The VIP mezzanine was a different world. The noise of the gala below was muffled. The table was set with baccarat crystal and gold leaf plates. Seated around the table were the titans of the world, the CEO of Eris Tech, the Duchess of York, and the founder of Cobalt Banks. And at the head of the table sat Sebastian Cross, with Madeline on his right. There were 2 empty seats at the far end, clearly the cheap seats of the billionaire table. Grant took them before anyone could object. "Sebastian," Grant said, leaning forward, flashing his blinding white veneers. "So glad we could finally connect. My office has been trying to reach yours for months. The synergy between Highmore Dynamics and Cross Industries is—" "Eat your salad, Grant," Sebastian said without looking up. He was busy pouring wine for Madeline. "The endive is flown in from Belgium." Grant flushed. He picked up his fork. The table was silent, save for the clinking of silverware. Madeline hadn't looked at him once. She was engaged in a quiet, intense conversation with the CEO of Eris Tech about quantum computing? Grant strained to listen. The issue with the cooling systems in the qubits isn't hardware, it's the algorithm, Madeline was saying effortlessly. If you route the processing through a liquid-state drive, you reduce heat by 40%. We ran the simulations last week. The CEO of Eris Tech, a man who had won a Nobel Prize, was nodding vigorously. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I hadn't considered the liquid-state variable. Grant nearly choked on his endive. Since when did Madeline know anything about quantum computing? She was the woman who used to call him to ask how to reset the Wi-Fi router. So, Grant interrupted, his voice too loud. Maddie, you seem to have educated yourself since the divorce. Taking night classes? The table went quiet. Madeline turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were different now. They used to be soft, pleading for affection. Now they were hard diamonds. Life is the best educator, Grant, she said coolly. After all, I had 7 years of observing how not to run a business. Tiffany giggled nervously. I think Grant runs a great business. He's on the cover of Forbes. Forbes, Sebastian Cross mused, swirling his wine. A magazine for people who want to be rich, read by people who aren't. Real wealth doesn't advertise, miss. Tiffany, she squeaked. Right, Sebastian said dismissively. Grant, you're here because I enjoy a good comedy. But let's cut to the chase. You want the global link contract. You want access to my shipping lanes. It makes sense, Grant said, leaning into his pitch mode. Highmore Dynamics has the best drone fleet in the hemisphere. Our Swiftwing model is unbeatable. We can cut your delivery times by 15%. 15%? Madeline repeated. She picked up her wine glass. That's cute. Grant's jaw tightened. Excuse me? 15% is a rounding error, Grant, Madeline said. The industry standard is shifting. If you aren't hitting 30% efficiency increases, you're obsolete. And your Swiftwing drones? They have a fatal flaw. The battery overheats if the payload exceeds 5 pounds in humidity over 80%. I imagine that's a problem for Mr. Cross's operations in Southeast Asia. Grant froze. That was a classified internal issue. They had buried that data deep in the R&D logs. How could she possibly know that? Industrial espionage is a serious crime, Maddie, Grant warned, his voice low. I'd be careful what you say. It's not espionage if you wrote the original code, Grant, she replied nonchalantly. You didn't write anything. You were my wife, Grant shouted, losing his composure. Several heads at nearby tables turned. Sebastian Cross placed a hand on the table. It was a gentle movement, but it carried the weight of a gavel. Grant, Sebastian said softly, you seem to be under a misapprehension. You think Madeline is here as my date? Isn't she? Grant sneered. She's certainly dressed the part. Sebastian smiled. It was a wolf's smile. Madeline isn't my date, Grant. She's my partner. Grant blinked. Partner? In what? Sebastian stood up. He picked up a spoon and tapped his glass. The sound rang out through the massive hall. The music stopped. The chatter below died down. All eyes turned to the mezzanine. Ladies and gentlemen, Sebastian's voice boomed without a microphone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I promised you an announcement regarding the future of Cross Industries and the Global Link project. He gestured to Madeline. She stood up, the black velvet catching the light. She looked magnificent. Terrifying. I am proud to announce that Cross Industries has entered into an exclusive 10-year partnership with the most innovative logistics company in the world, Sebastian announced. Grant puffed out his chest. This is it, he thought. He's toying with me, but he's going to say Highmore Dynamics. He has to. There's no one else. Please welcome the CEO of Aeon Systems, Sebastian continued. Miss Madeline Sterling. The room erupted in applause. Grant sat in his chair, the blood roaring in his ears. Aeon? The mysterious company that had been stealing his market share? The ghost company? Madeline was Aeon? He looked at her. She wasn't looking at the crowd. She was looking directly at him. She raised her glass in a small, mocking salute. You, Grant whispered, the realization hitting him like a freight train. You built Aeon? Madeline sat back down as the applause died. She leaned across the table, her voice a whisper meant only for him. I built your company too, Grant, she said. I fixed your code. I designed your logistics maps. I wrote your speeches. You just never noticed because you were too busy looking in the mirror. But when you threw me out, you forgot one thing. What? Grant choked out. You kept the assets, Madeline smiled, but I kept the brains. The morning after the gala, Highmore Dynamics didn't open for business. It opened for a slaughter. Grant stormed into his office at 7 a.m., his eyes bloodshot, still wearing the tuxedo shirt from the night before. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night screaming at his lawyers, screaming at Tiffany, and screaming at the walls. Marcus, Grant bellowed as he kicked open the conference room doors. Marcus, his CFO, was already there. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Along with him were the entire board of directors. They were all sitting in silence. What is going on? Grant demanded. Why is my phone blowing up? Why is the stock down 12% in pre-market trading? It's not 12%, Grant, Marcus said quietly, turning a laptop screen around. It's 22%. And falling. Grant stared at the red line plummeting on the chart. Why? Because of a partnership announcement? That's just hype. We have the infrastructure, we have the warehouses, we have lawsuits, Marcus said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. Served at 6 a.m. this morning. Grant grabbed the papers. Plaintiff, Aon Systems. Defendant, Highmore Dynamics. Charge, patent infringement, theft of intellectual property, and breach of implied contract. This is a joke, Grant laughed hysterically. She's suing me for IP? I own everything. The prenup. The prenup covered marital assets, said an older board member, Mr. Henderson. It covered the house, the cars, the cash. It did not cover the original source code for the Ether engine, which, according to these documents, was registered to a M. Sterling 3 years before you incorporated Highmore Dynamics. Grant froze. He remembered. Back in the beginning, when they were broke, he had been struggling with the drone navigation system. He had given up. He went to bed. When he woke up, the code was fixed. Maddie had said, I toyed with it a little. Does this work? He had never asked how. He had just taken it, slapped his name on it, and sold it. She can't prove that, Grant stammered. She has the original timestamps, Grant, Marcus said, his voice shaking. She has the notebooks. She has sworn affidavits from your old professors stating you were failing remedial coding while she was tutoring the class. The room was deadly silent. It gets worse, Marcus continued. Because of the lawsuit, the SEC has suspended trading on our stock pending an investigation. Our credit lines are frozen, and the bank called. Which bank? All of them. They're calling in the loans. We leveraged everything to build the new distribution center in Nevada. Without the cross-contract, we can't service the debt. Grant sank into a chair. So we fight it. We drag it out in court. We bleed her dry. We can't, mister, Henderson said, standing up. Because, while you were busy playing celebrity, Aon Systems has been buying up our debt. Grant looked up, his vision blurring. What? Madeline Sterling bought your debt, Grant, Henderson said. She owns the loans. She is the creditor. And she has notified us that she intends to foreclose on the assets unless we agree to a restructuring. Restructuring? Grant asked, hope flaring for a second. A merger? No, Henderson said, buttoning his jacket. A takeover. She's made an offer to buy the company for pennies on the dollar. And the board has voted. Grant looked around the table. The faces of men and women who had praised him yesterday now looked at him with disgust. You voted? Grant whispered. We accepted the offer, Henderson said. It's the only way to save the pensions of the employees. Aon takes control of all assets, patents, and infrastructure effective immediately. You can't do that, Grant screamed, slamming his fist on the table. I am the CEO. I own 51% of the voting shares. Actually, Marcus said, looking down at his hands. You don't. What are you talking about? The expansion loan you took out last year, Marcus said. The one to buy the penthouse? You put up 10% of your personal stock as collateral. When the stock price hit the trigger point 10 minutes ago, the bank liquidated it. Grant felt the room spin. He fell back into his chair. Who? Grant gasped. Who bought the liquidated shares? The conference room door opened. The click-clack of high heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the room. Madeline walked in. She was wearing a sharp white power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked fresh, energized, and utterly in command. Behind her walked Uncle Leo, looking gruff and satisfied in a cheap suit, carrying a briefcase. Madeline didn't look at the board members. She walked straight to the head of the table, Grant's seat. "Get out," she said softly. Grant looked at her. He looked at the woman he had discarded, the woman he had called a nobody. "Maddie," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, we can talk about this. I built this company. It has my name on it." "Not for long," Madeline said. "We're rebranding next week. Aeon has a nicer ring to it, don't you think?" "I have nothing," Grant whispered. "If you take this, I have nothing." "You have the penthouse," Madeline said, checking a file in her hand. "Oh wait, no. The mortgage on that was tied to the company accounts. That's ours now too." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "You have $25,000, Grant," she said. "I deposited it into your personal account this morning. It's what you gave me. I think that's fair." "Maddie, please." Grant grabbed her hand. She pulled it away sharply. "Security," she called out. 2 guards entered. They weren't the usual building security. They were Aeon private security. "Escort Mr. Highmore off the premises," Madeline commanded. "And make sure he doesn't take anything. Not a stapler, not a pen." "You can't do this to me," Grant screamed as the guards grabbed his arms. He was dragged toward the door, his heels skidding on the floor. "I'm Grant Highmore. I'm a billionaire." "You were," Madeline corrected him, sitting down in the leather chair he had warmed for 5 years. She spun it around to face the window, looking out at the city she now owned a piece of. "Now," she said to the room, ignoring Grant's screams fading down the hallway. "Let's get to work. We have a lot of mess to clean up." As Grant was thrown out onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, it started to rain. He stood there, shivering in his tuxedo shirt, looking up at the glass tower that used to be his kingdom. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Tiffany. "Hey babe, saw the news. Moving out. Don't call me. Also, I'm taking the dog." Grant dropped the phone into a puddle. He fell to his knees, the cold rain soaking him to the bone. He was alone. He was broke. And for the first time in his life, he was a nobody. 6 months later, the rain in New York felt different to Grant. It didn't feel like atmosphere. It felt like judgment. Grant sat in a booth at Sal's Diner in Queens, the very same diner where he had met Madeline 9 years ago. He wasn't wearing a Savile Row suit. He was wearing a windbreaker he'd bought at a thrift store. The coffee in front of him was lukewarm. He had spent the last half year trying to claw his way back. But the doors were closed. The Highmore name, once a golden ticket, was now radioactive. No venture capital firm would touch him. No board would hire him. He was a liability. The bell above the diner door jingled. Grant didn't look up until a heavy folder slid across the Formica table, bumping into his coffee cup. He looked up. Standing there was Uncle Leo. Madeline's uncle looked the same as he always had, grease under his fingernails, a flannel shirt, eyes hidden under bushy gray brows. But there was something different about his stance. He didn't slouch. "What do you want?" Grant muttered. "Here to gloat? Madeline already took the company. She took the house. I'm signing the bankruptcy papers tomorrow." "I'm not here for Madeline," Leo rumbled, sliding into the booth opposite him. "I'm here to collect a debt." Grant laughed bitterly. "Get in line, old man. I owe everyone." "You don't owe me money, Grant," Leo said. "You owe me an explanation." Leo tapped the folder. "Open it." Grant hesitated, then flipped the cover. Inside were bank records, old ones, dating back 7 years, to the very start of Highmore Dynamics. Grant frowned. He saw a transfer of $500,000, the seed money that had launched his company. The money he had told everyone came from a private angel investor in Silicon Valley. He looked at the name on the account, L. Sterling Holdings. Grant's eyes widened. He looked up at the old man in the flannel shirt. "You?" Grant whispered. "You were the angel investor?" "I worked 30 years at Lockheed Martin as a lead engineer," Leo said quietly. "I patented 3 guidance systems used in commercial aviation. I made a fortune, Grant. But I never liked the suits. I liked the work. So, I retired to Queens to fix cars." Grant felt sick. He had treated Leo like a servant. He had made Leo wait in the car during Thanksgiving dinners. He had laughed at Leo's cheap beer. "When Maddie married you," Leo continued, his voice hard, "she told me you had potential. She said you were brilliant. So I gave you the money. Anonymously. Because I loved her. And she believed in you." Leo leaned forward. I watched you take that money and build an empire. I was proud. Until I watched you stop building and start bullying. You forgot who wrote the code. You forgot who gave you the cash. You stood on the shoulders of giants and convinced yourself you were flying. I didn't know, Grant stammered. You didn't ask, Leo corrected him. You saw a mechanic, so you assumed nobody. You saw a quiet wife, so you assumed nobody. That's your fatal flaw, Grant. You think worth is something you wear. Leo stood up. He dropped a single $5 bill on the table to pay for Grant's coffee. Madeline wanted to destroy you, Leo said. I told her that wasn't necessary. You were doing a fine job of that yourself. This folder? It's the proof that you never made it on your own. Not once. From day one, you were living on sterling charity. Leo turned to leave, pausing at the door. Oh, and Grant? That nobody you divorced? She just closed the deal with NASA. Turns out, they like her code. The door chimed shut. Grant stared at the bank records, the fluorescent lights of the diner humming above him. The silence was deafening. The wind at Teterboro Airport didn't just blow, it bit. It was a sharp, biting gust that came off the Hackensack River, carrying the smell of kerosene and freezing rain. Grant Highmore pulled the collar of his thrift store windbreaker up around his neck, but it did nothing to stop the chill. He stood outside the chain-link perimeter fence of the private airfield. His fingers curled through the diamond-shaped steel mesh until his knuckles turned white. He shouldn't have come. He knew that. It was masochistic, but he couldn't stay away. All morning, the news channels had been screaming about it. CNBC, Bloomberg, even the mainstream networks were interrupting their broadcasts for the event of the decade. Aeon Systems, the company born from the ashes of his own empire, was unveiling the Aeon X prototype. It was a hypersonic transport jet commissioned by NASA and the European Space Agency, designed to revolutionize global logistics. And she built it. Grant looked through the fence, his eyes stinging from the cold and the lack of sleep. 200 yards away, on the private tarmac, the jet sat like a predator waiting to pounce. It was painted a matte, light-absorbing black, with the sleek, silver Aeon logo emblazoned on the tail fin. It looked dangerous. It looked expensive. It looked like the future, a future he was supposed to own. A fleet of black SUVs rolled onto the tarmac, flanked by police motorcycles. The press pen, set up near the hangar, erupted into a frenzy of camera flashes. Grant watched as the doors of the lead SUV opened. Sebastian Cross stepped out first. He looked every inch the titan of industry, wearing a long charcoal wool coat over a suit that probably cost more than the sedan Grant had driven here in. Sebastian turned and offered a hand to the person still inside. A black stiletto heel touched the pavement. Madeline emerged. Grant felt the air leave his lungs. She wasn't wearing the soft cardigans she used to wear when she made him soup. She wasn't even wearing the gala gown. She was dressed for war. She wore a tailored white trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, contrasting sharply with the dark tarmac and the black jet. Her hair was blown back by the wind, but she didn't seem to notice. She looked radiant, terrifying, and utterly untouchable. Grant pressed his face against the cold fence. "Look at me," he willed her. "Just look at me. Acknowledge that I exist." Inside his mind, the memories were playing on a loop. He remembered the night he told her she was a nobody. He remembered the sneer in his voice. "Without me, you don't exist." The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He was the one standing in the mud, shivering, while she walked on red carpets. "Back away from the fence, sir." Grant jumped. A security guard, not private security, but a Port Authority officer was standing behind him, hand resting near his belt. "I'm just watching," Grant rasped, his voice sounding thin and pathetic even to his own ears. I used to know her." The officer looked Grant up and down. He saw the scuffed shoes, the unshaven jaw, the desperate eyes. He saw a crazy person. "Sure you did, buddy," the officer said with a pitying smirk. "Just keep moving. This is a restricted area." Grant didn't move. He couldn't. On the tarmac, Madeline stopped. She was speaking to a group of Japanese investors who were bowing deeply to her. She returned the bow with perfect form, graceful, respectful, commanding. Sebastian leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Madeline laughed. It was a genuine laugh, throwing her head back. Grant remembered that laugh. He hadn't heard it in 5 years. He realized with a sickening jolt that he had stopped trying to make her laugh long before he divorced her. Then, the press conference began. Microphones were thrust toward her. Grant couldn't hear the words over the wind, but he had the live stream playing on his cracked phone screen. The audio lagged by a few seconds, creating a surreal echo. "Miss Sterling," a reporter shouted from the phone speaker. Critics said that acquiring Highmore Dynamics was a risky move given their debt load. "How did you turn it around so quickly?" On the screen, and in the distance, Madeline smiled. "Highmore Dynamics had excellent bones," Madeline said into the microphone, her voice crisp and confident, but it lacked a soul. It lacked vision. "We didn't just pay off the debt. We restructured the philosophy. We stopped building things to sell them and started building things to solve problems. That is the Aon way." "And what about your ex-husband?" another reporter shouted. Grant Highmore claimed he was the architect of the original technology. "Do you have a comment on his bankruptcy?" Grant's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. She was going to gloat. She was going to crush him publicly. He deserved it, and he knew it. Madeline paused. She looked directly into the camera lens, and for a second, Grant felt like she was looking through the phone screen, straight into his soul. "I don't think about the past," Madeline said simply. "I'm too busy building the future." Next question. She dismissed him. She didn't destroy him. She did something worse. She erased him. He wasn't even worth a comment. He wasn't a villain in her story anymore. He was a footnote. Grant dropped the phone. It landed in the wet grass. As the interview wrapped up, Madeline turned to board the jet. The stairs lowered automatically with a hydraulic hiss. Suddenly, she stopped. It was as if she felt the weight of his gaze. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just chance. But Madeline turned away from the jet, away from the cameras, and looked out toward the perimeter fence. The distance was too great to see facial features clearly, yet their eyes locked. Grant froze. He wanted to shout. He wanted to wave. He wanted to scream. I'm sorry I was a fool. I'm sorry I didn't see you." But he stayed silent. The shame was a physical weight, pinning him to the spot. Sebastian noticed her pause. He stepped up beside her, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. He followed her gaze, squinting into the distance. He saw the lone figure by the fence. Sebastian said something to Madeline. Grant saw her shake her head. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked complete. Slowly, deliberately, Madeline raised her hand. For a heartbeat, Grant thought she was waving goodbye. A sliver of hope ignited in his chest, a hope for forgiveness, for acknowledgement. But she wasn't waving. She tapped the face of her wristwatch. Tap. Tap. It was the gesture. "Tick-tock, Grant. You're wasting my time." It was the exact gesture he had used on her 1,000 times in restaurants, in their living room, in the car. It was the gesture he used to shut her up, to make her feel small, to tell her that his time was gold and hers was dirt. Now, she was using it to tell him that his time was up. She turned her back on him. The white trench coat flared as she spun around. She grabbed the handrail of the jet stairs and ascended without looking back. Sebastian followed her, disappearing into the dark fuselage. The heavy door of the Aon X sealed shut. "Clear the area," the loudspeakers boomed. "Engine start in T-minus 60 seconds. Grant stumbled back as the engines began to whine. It started as a low hum, vibrating in the soles of his shoes, and quickly built to a deafening, chest-rattling roar. The heat shimmer from the exhaust distorted the air behind the jet. The grass around the runway flattened. Grant watched the plane taxi to the end of the runway. He watched it turn. And then, with a roar that sounded like the tearing of the sky, it surged forward. It didn't just take off. It rocketed. The Aon X climbed at an angle that seemed impossible, piercing the gray cloud layer within seconds. It was gone. Grant stood alone in the silence that followed. The press was packing up. The security detail was dispersing. He walked back to his car. It was a 10-year-old sedan with a rusting wheel well. He sat in the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. But he didn't turn it. He just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He looked old. He looked tired. "She called me a nobody," he whispered to the empty car. He realized now that she had never called him a nobody. He had called her that. She had simply proven that she was somebody. And in doing so, she had shown him what he really was. Not a titan, not a genius, just a man who had held a diamond in his hand and thrown it away because he thought it was glass. Scene shift. Inside the Aeon X jet, 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, the cabin was silent, save for the gentle hum of the air filtration system. It smelled of rich leather and fresh espresso. Madeline sat in a swivel chair, looking out the porthole at the curvature of the earth. The sky up here wasn't gray, it was a deep, bruising purple, fading into the black of space. "You okay?" Sebastian placed a cup of espresso on the magnetic table next to her. He sat in the chair opposite, crossing his long legs. "I saw him, you know," Madeline said softly, not looking away from the window. "I know," Sebastian said. "I saw him too. He looked small." Madeline took a sip of the espresso. "I used to be so afraid of him. I used to think he held the sun and the moon. I thought if I left him, the world would go dark." She turned to face Sebastian. Her eyes were clear, dry, and bright. "But the sun is shining just fine, isn't it?" Sebastian smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. His grip was warm, solid, and real. "The sun is shining," he agreed. "And we have a meeting in Tokyo in 11 hours. The Prime Minister is clearing his schedule." Madeline squeezed his hand, then pulled away to open her laptop. "Let him clear it," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, bringing up schematics, stock projections, and the future of the company. "But tell him we can't stay late. I have an idea for a new engine design, and I want to get back to the lab by Tuesday." "Always working," Sebastian teased. "You need a hobby, Maddie." Madeline paused. She looked at the screen at the empire she had built, the people she employed, the technology she created. She thought of Uncle Leo back in Queens, restoring vintage Mustangs with the checks she sent him. She thought of Grant, standing in the cold, watching her fly away. "I have a hobby," Madeline smiled, a dangerous, beautiful spark in her eye. "Oh? Winning?" she said. She hit enter. The jet banked left, chasing the sunrise towards the east, leaving the ghosts of New York far, far behind. And that, my friends, is why you never underestimate the person standing silently in the corner. Grant Highmore thought power came from a suit and a bank account, but he learned the hard way that true power comes from the mind and the people you surround yourself with. Madeline didn't just get revenge, she got justice. If you enjoyed this story of karma and sweet redemption, make sure to smash that like button, it really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories about arrogance getting checked and underdogs taking the throne, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you have done if you were Madeline? Would you have forgiven him? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you call a nobody. I'll see you in the next story.